An old woman says to a billionaire CEO, "Hey son, you look just like your father did before he left." The grocery store door chimed with a hollow echo that cut through the quiet hum of refrigerators and fluorescent light. The sound, ordinary to most, carried the weight of a gunshot to her ears. She nearly dropped the loaf of bread she was holding. Her frail fingers, knotted from years of arthritis, trembled as though they'd been struck by a sudden winter chill. She turned her head slowly, almost afraid of what she might see, yet compelled, as though fate itself had tugged her chin. He was there. Tall, composed. Every movement of his tailored coat and polished shoes carried the gravity of a man used to controlling boardrooms and bending economies. His phone pressed to his ear, his voice low, commanding, efficient. His hair was dark with only the faintest silver, and his eyes, sharp, cold, calculating, seemed to slice through the aisle like blades. For a heartbeat, she thought time had folded. Her chest tightened. It was him. The same shoulders, the same gait, the same shadow that had walked away from her half a lifetime ago. Except, no. This man was too young. His face had not yet felt the decay of years, yet her heart knew what her mind rejected. The bread slid from her hands, tumbling against the linoleum floor with a soft thud. He turned at the sound. Their eyes met. She saw him as if through water, blurred by tears already stinging her lashes. She saw not the billionaire he had become, not the immaculate suit or the expensive wristwatch. She saw a ghost, resurrected in flesh. Her lips parted, quivering. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Hey, son," she whispered, her voice cracked, fragile as old glass. "You look just like your father did before he left." The words hung in the air like smoke. He froze, his jaw tightened. For the first time in years, his schedule-driven brain faltered, the carefully stacked bricks of power and control teetering. He pulled the phone from his ear, lowering it slowly as though it had grown unbearably heavy. "What did you say?" His voice was controlled, but beneath it was a thread, a single fray in the fabric of his calm. The old woman blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her body trembled as though her very bones remembered the man she once knew. She clutched the edge of her shopping cart, gripping it as if it might keep her tethered to reality. You walk just like him," she said, her voice both tender and broken. "Your eyes, the same fire, the same storm." She smiled faintly, bitterly. "Before the storm turned on us." Shoppers moved around them, oblivious, caught in their own trivial worlds of cereal boxes and discount signs. But for the two of them, the grocery store fell silent. The hum of the coolers, the soft creak of carts, the distant beep of a checkout scanner, all faded, leaving only the echo of her words. He swallowed hard. His first instinct was dismissal. Another stranger mistaking him for someone else. Another misplaced memory projected onto a face. He'd had admirers, critics, reporters, people who saw not him but a symbol. This was no different, he told himself. And yet it was. Because for reasons he could not name, his chest ached. Something about the way her voice cracked on the word father, something about the rawness in her eyes cut through him deeper than the sharpest headline or the cruelest deal. He took a step closer. "Do we know each other?" His words were clipped, hesitant, betraying the confusion pressing against his ribs. Her hand rose slightly, as if to reach for his face, then faltered halfway. She drew it back, fingers curling into her chest instead. She shook her head slowly, eyes never leaving his. "No," she said softly, "not you, not exactly." The silence that followed was unbearable. He shifted his weight, unused to uncertainty, unused to being the one without control. He wanted to leave. He had meetings, investors waiting, decisions worth millions dangling on his next call. But his feet wouldn't move. Because something in her sorrow had hooked into him. Something that felt disturbingly like home. The old woman bent down, slowly, painfully, to retrieve the bread she'd dropped. Her joints cracked audibly as she lifted it. She placed it gently in her cart, then straightened, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling with effort. She turned her cart toward the next aisle, as though their conversation had ended before it began. But her words lingered in his mind, repeating in rhythm with his heartbeat. "You look just like your father did before he left." The sentence burrowed inside him, unsettling, foreign yet familiar, as though someone had unlocked a memory he didn't know he had. He stayed frozen in the aisle, phone forgotten in his hand, staring after her as she disappeared between shelves of canned goods. And for the first time in decades, the billionaire CEO felt like a lost boy. He should have walked away. That was what the rational side of his mind screamed, the same voice that had guided him from a penniless child to the polished titan of industry he had become. Leave, forget. Go back to the meeting that awaited. Nothing good could come from letting a stranger's words rattle his composure. And yet he found himself moving. His polished shoes clicked against the linoleum as he followed her cart into the next aisle. He hated himself for it. He had conquered corporations, faced down hostile boards, endured endless interviews, but following an old woman in a grocery store, that was absurd. Still, there he was. She stood near the shelves of canned soup, scanning the labels with the deliberate care of someone who counted coins before counting calories. The fluorescent lights above cast a pale glow on her hair, once golden now dulled with age, strands brittle as hay. He cleared his throat softly, an awkward sound from a man unaccustomed to hesitation. "Excuse me," he said. She turned, eyes still glassy with unshed tears. For a moment she simply looked at him, as though memorizing his face. Then she smiled faintly, like someone studying a photograph long lost and finally found. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling with embarrassment. "I shouldn't have said that. It must have sounded strange." He crossed his arms, shoulders stiff. "You said I looked like your father, before he left. What did you mean by that?" Her gaze dropped to the soup cans, hands twisting the edge of her cart. "Not your father," she murmured. "Mine, or maybe yours. It doesn't matter anymore. Men leave. They always leave." The words hit him harder than he expected. A pang of recognition, no, memory, stirred. A shadow of a tall man with broad shoulders, a voice like thunder, walking out a door that never opened again. He shoved it down quickly, hiding it where no one could see. "You don't know me," he said firmly, "and I don't know you." The old woman nodded, but there was no fear in her. Only sorrow, and something else, something like gentleness. "Maybe not," she whispered. "But grief recognizes grief, and you wear it like a coat, son." He stiffened. Nobody spoke to him like that. Not employees, not journalists, not even his so-called friends. His wealth and reputation built walls that protected him from being seen too closely. Yet, this frail woman, with her trembling hands and second-hand coat, had slipped through effortlessly. "Look," he said, forcing steel into his tone, "I don't have time for this." "Of course you don't," she said softly. "The world has claimed all of your time, but maybe it hasn't claimed your heart yet." He exhaled sharply, a humorless laugh escaping him. "You don't know me," he repeated. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know anything about me." She studied him quietly, her silence far heavier than words. Then, slowly, she reached into her cart. Her hand closed around something tucked between a carton of milk and the bread she had dropped earlier. She pulled out a small, worn package, wrapped in faded tissue, tied with twine. "This isn't for you," she said, her hand trembling as she held it. "It was for him. For the man who left. I never got the chance to give it." He stared at the parcel. His first instinct was to reject it outright. He didn't want the burden of a stranger's grief, didn't want to carry something that wasn't his. But his eyes betrayed him, tracing the delicate folds of the tissue, the way her fingers caressed it as though it was sacred. "Why are you showing me this?" His voice was low, edged with irritation he didn't fully feel. "Because," she said, "you carry his shadow, and shadows need light." The air between them thickened. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her words lodged themselves under his ribs, deeper than he wanted them. Finally, he stepped back, shaking his head. "I should go." "Yes," she said simply, "you should." Her acceptance of his dismissal startled him. No protest, no plea, just quiet certainty. She turned her cart, pushed it slowly down the aisle, leaving him standing there with his fists clenched at his sides. He told himself to leave, to forget, to chalk it up as one of those odd encounters that cling to city life. But as he turned toward the checkout, he caught sight of her again. She was at the far register, counting coins with trembling fingers, the cashier watching impatiently. her back bent, her shoulders hunched under invisible weight. And against his will, a flicker of something anger. Pity stirred in him, not for her words, not for the confusion she had sown into his chest, but for the sight of her hands shaking as she slid her last coin across the counter. The CEO, master of mergers and acquisitions, conqueror of empires, felt something he hadn't felt in decades. An ache. And though he would have denied it, the ache felt terrifyingly like recognition. He left the store with sharp, deliberate steps, the automatic doors sighing open as if relieved to let him go. Outside, the air was brittle with late winter chill, the kind that bit at exposed skin and turned breath into ghosts. He pulled his coat tighter, jaw clenched, mind whirling. He told himself it was nothing, just a frail woman chasing the shadow of a man who had long since vanished. People projected their losses onto strangers all the time. He had no obligation to carry hers. Yet as he strode across the parking lot, her words clung to him like frost. "You look just like your father did, before he left." He stopped by his car, fingers pausing on the key fob. His reflection stared back from the tinted window, controlled, immaculate, untouchable. But for a fleeting second, he didn't see himself. He saw a boy, small, silent, standing in the doorway as a man's footsteps receded down the hall, the echo of a slammed door sealing the silence. He shook it off violently, pressing the fob until the car chirped. He slid into the leather seat, the scent of polish and wealth wrapping around him like armor. He started the engine, the purr of machinery grounding him. Work, focus, numbers, contracts, profits. That was his world, that was what kept the ache at bay. And yet, as he drove past the store's entrance, he saw her again. The old woman stood near the bus stop, clutching her groceries to her chest. The loaf of bread poked from the top of her bag, the tissue-wrapped parcel still cradled carefully against her side. Snowflakes had begun to fall, gathering in her thinning hair, dusting her shoulders like fragile ash. He gripped the steering wheel tighter and looked away. Not my problem, not my business, not my past. Still, at the next red light, he caught himself glancing at her again in the rearview mirror. She hadn't moved, just stood there, as though rooted in place, eyes lowered to the ground. The light turned green. He pressed the accelerator, speeding forward. But his chest burned. That evening his penthouse felt colder than usual. The glass walls framed the glittering skyline, towers of light piercing the dark. It should have comforted him, the empire he had built from nothing, yet the silence pressed too hard, too thick. He poured himself a drink. The amber liquid caught the light as he raised it to his lips, but the burn in his throat was hollow, unsatisfying. He set the glass down with a sharp clink, staring at the condensation rings spreading across the marble counter. Why couldn't he shake her voice? He replayed it over and over, the fragile tremor, the way the word son had cracked her lips, like it belonged to her. The way she had spoken of grief, of shadows and storms, as if she knew him. "No," he muttered, rising abruptly. His reflection in the window glared back at him. "She doesn't know me, nobody does." His phone buzzed on the counter. A text from his assistant. Reminder, 9 a.m. shareholder call. Prep notes ready. Routine. Control. The world he knew. He grasped onto it like a lifeline. And yet, when he finally lay in bed, the city lights blinking outside his window, he dreamed. He dreamed of a boy waiting at a door that never opened again. He dreamed of footsteps fading, of a hand reaching out, then slipping away. And in the dream, when he turned his head, it wasn't his father walking away. It was him. The next morning he arrived at his office earlier than usual, his face set in stone. Assistants scurried, meetings unfolded, numbers danced across screens. He was efficient, precise, untouchable. But at odd moments, mid-sentence, mid-deal, her face appeared in his mind. Those pale blue eyes, swimming with tears yet still steady, that parcel, tied with twine. He shook it off each time, burying himself in contracts and projections. Still, as the hours wore on, a single question gnawed at him like a hidden splinter. What if she wasn't set wrong? What if he did look like the man who had abandoned her? What if he was walking the same road? What if the resemblance wasn't just in his face, but in his fate? The thought curdled in his stomach. He snapped at an intern, slammed the door harder than intended, silenced the room with one sharp glare. But even then, he couldn't silence her voice. That evening, as he rode the elevator down from the top floor, he caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. His shoulders, his jaw, his eyes. Yes, he looked powerful, successful, but he also looked tired, hardened, alone. And in that flicker of distorted reflection, he saw his father again. For the first time in years, he felt a shiver of fear, not of losing power or money, but of becoming the very shadow he despised. Still he clenched his fists, whispering to himself like a vow. No, I stum not him, I stum not. But deep inside, he didn't fully believe it. The week dragged by with meetings, contracts, and endless decisions. Each one weighted in millions. On the outside he was composed as ever, impeccable suit, calculated voice, the sharp edge of a man who could bend markets. But inside, her words festered. At night he caught himself glancing toward the window, half expecting to see her frail silhouette waiting in the snow. He told himself he was being absurd. Yet the ache remained. By Friday evening, when most of the city prepared for the weekend's distractions, he found himself driving not home, not to the office, but back to the grocery store. He told himself it was coincidence. He was hungry. He needed to restock, but as his car rolled into the lot, headlights washing over the glass doors, he knew better. Inside, the store hummed with low chatter and the rattle of carts. His eyes searched almost against his will, and there she was. The old woman, bent over the produce section, examining apples with the slow deliberation of someone for whom each coin mattered. Her hands trembled faintly as she turned the fruit, searching for bruises. He almost walked away. Pride clawed at him, reminding him he had no business here, but his feet betrayed him, carrying him forward until he stood a few feet away. Those ones set last long, he heard himself say, nodding at the apples in her hand. They've been sitting too long under the lights. She turned, startled. Her eyes widened faintly when she recognized him, then softened. Still, she said gently, sometimes even the bruised ones taste sweet, if you cut away the damage. The words hung between them, heavier than apples ever could be. He looked away, uncomfortable, reaching instead for a bag of oranges. His hand lingered too long on the fruit, as if stalling. She tucked 2 apples into her basket, her fingers brushing the bruised skin as though it were precious. Then, almost without thought, she pulled out a third and held it toward him. You should try one, she said softly. Not every bruise means ruin. He froze. His instinct was to refuse. He didn't accept gifts, especially not from strangers. But something in her expression disarmed him, not pity, not charity, just offering. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out. Their fingers brushed for the briefest second as the apple passed from her hand to his. It was a small thing, insignificant to anyone watching, but to him it was seismic. Thank you, he said quietly, the words unfamiliar in his mouth. She smiled, faint, almost invisible. You're welcome, son. The word son should have stung. Instead it softened something he hadn't realized was stone. They walked the aisles separately after that, yet somehow always within sight of each other. At the checkout, she fumbled again with her coins, her hands shaking as she counted. The cashier sighed impatiently, shifting from foot to foot. Without thinking, he stepped forward. Put it on mine, he said, sliding his card across the reader. She looked up at him, startled.
No, she whispered, shaking her head. I can pay. I always pay.
That's fine, he said firmly. That's nothing. But to her it was clearly not nothing. She blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill. After a moment, she gave a small nod, her pride bending just enough to let gratitude through. When the bags were handed to her, she lifted them slowly, struggling against the weight. Before he knew what he was doing, he reached out and took one from her. I still carry this, he said. She looked at him again, her lips trembling, then she nodded once more, silently. Outside, the snow had thickened, flakes swirling in the glow of the streetlights. They walked side by side toward the bus stop, the cold biting at their faces, the crunch of snow beneath their shoes, the only sound for a while. At the stop, she set her bags down on the bench, sitting slowly, easing her tired joints. He stood beside her, apple still in his hand. You didn't have to, she said softly, looking up at him. I know, he replied. He wasn't sure why he had. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then almost shyly she nodded toward the apple. "Try it." He hesitated, then raised it to his lips, biting into the skin. The taste burst sharp and sweet, fresher than he expected. A trace of bitterness lingered, but it was bearable. He chewed slowly, surprised by the memory it stirred. A kitchen long ago, a boy with sticky fingers. A woman's laughter, a man's shadow leaning against the doorway. He swallowed hard, forcing the memory down with the fruit. That's good," he said quietly. She smiled, eyes glistening in the lamplight.
Told you.
For the first time since their strange encounter, the air between them softened, still heavy, still complicated, but threaded with something else, something fragile. Not trust. Not yet, but perhaps the first step toward it. The bus came rumbling through the snow, brakes hissing, headlights slicing through the swirling flakes. She rose slowly from the bench, gathering her bags with practiced care. He stood beside her, apple core still in his hand, an odd reluctance rooting him to the spot. She looked at him once more before stepping onto the bus. "Thank you," she said softly, "for carrying the weight, even for a moment." Her words lingered as the bus pulled away, leaving him alone in the hush of snowfall. Carrying the weight, the phrase sank deep. He told himself it was over, he'd done his part. A strange encounter, a gesture, an end. Yet all weekend she haunted him. On Monday evening, after a day of hostile negotiations, he found himself driving past the bus stop again. He didn't expect to see her. But there she was, sitting on the bench in the cold groceries at her feet, staring at the ground as if waiting not just for a bus but for something the world had long denied her. He parked before he could stop himself. "Why are you always out here?" he asked, as he approached. His voice harsher than intended. She looked up slowly, eyes calm, resigned. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go until the shelter opens its doors." His chest tightened. "You are homeless?" She gave a faint, almost amused smile, as though his shock was naive. Life does instead always leave room for comfort, but it still leaves room for breath, and that's enough for now. He shifted uncomfortably, the snow crunching under his shoes. He wasn't used to this raw honesty without polish, without negotiation. His world was marble floors and glass towers, not bus stops and shelters. "You shouldn't be out here in the cold," he said finally. She shrugged gently. "The cold doesn't frighten me, not anymore. There are worse chills than snow." Something in her tone pierced him. "What do you mean?" She was quiet for a moment, staring at the flakes falling into her lap. Then she spoke, her voice low, steady. "My husband left 30 years ago. One morning he put on his coat, said he'd be back for supper. He never came. I waited that night. I waited the next. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years. No letter, no body, no goodbye." Her hand tightened faintly around the tissue-wrapped parcel in her lap. "I kept this for him. His birthday gift. I thought, if he came back, I could still give it. Foolish, is that it, to keep something wrapped for 3 decades?" The CEO swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to tell her it was foolish, that no one should wait so long for someone who didn't care enough to stay. But the words stuck, caught in the memory of his own silence as a child, the silence that followed the slam of the door. "You must have hated him," he said, finally. She shook her head slowly. "No. Hate eats the soul. I pitied him. Whatever storm drove him away must have been colder than anything I've known." Her voice cracked then, just barely, and for the first time he saw not just resilience but fracture. A wound long hidden, carried quietly like an old scar. He looked away, uncomfortable, yet unable to leave. "Do you ever think you still see him again?" She smiled faintly, bitterly. "Sometimes, in dreams, he walks in with the same smile, the same step, and I wake up, and it's gone. That's the cruelty of memory, it makes ghosts real for a breath." Her gaze flicked to him, lingering. "That's why I said you looked like him. For a moment, I thought the ghost had flesh again." His chest ached. He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, to cut the thread before it tangled further. But instead, he whispered, "I know what it's like, to wait for someone who never comes back." The words escaped before he could stop them. Her eyes softened instantly, as though she recognized the fracture beneath his polished surface. "Your father?" she asked gently. He froze. His instinct was to shut down, to deflect, to retreat behind silence. But the truth burned too close to the surface. He nodded once, curtly. "She didn't set press. She didn't demand details. She only said softly, 'Then we share the same winter.'" The snow thickened around them, settling on their shoulders, their hair, two figures from different worlds, bound by the absence of men who had left them behind. For the first time, he didn't feel like a CEO, he felt like a son who had never stopped waiting. When the bus arrived, she rose again, gathering her bags. She looked at him once more before stepping on. "Winston, sit here in silence," she said. "They need to be spoken, even if no one listens." And then she was gone again, swallowed by the night. But her words remained, echoing through him like a truth he had spent his whole life avoiding. Snow turned to rain, as the week bled on, a cold drizzle that slicked the city streets and painted everything in gray. He buried himself in work again, contracts, markets, endless voices demanding his attention. It should have consumed him, it usually did. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The apple in his hand. Her whisper, "We share the same winter." And against his better judgment, he sought her out again. She was at the bus stop as always, clutching her parcel and her grocery bags, soaked through despite the umbrella she didn't have. This time, when he pulled up, he rolled down the window. "Get in," he said. She blinked, startled. Rain trickled down her face, catching on her lashes. "I don't set." "You still freeze out here," he interrupted, sharper than he meant. "Get in." She hesitated, then opened the door, settling gingerly into the leather seat. Her damp coat left dark patches on the upholstery, but he said nothing. The silence was thick as the car pulled away. Rain hammered against the windshield, wipers sweeping rhythmically. "Where to?" he asked finally. "The shelter," she said quietly. "Down on 14th. He nodded, turning the wheel. For a long moment, only the hum of the engine filled the space. Then she said, "You didn't have to." "I know," he muttered. "I wanted to." The shelter was small, worn, its paint chipped, its windows dim. As they pulled up, people glanced from the doorway, huddled figures, their eyes flicking from her to the expensive car, suspicion sharp. He noticed it too, the way they stared at him, the polished stranger escorting one of their own. He felt out of place. A wolf in a den of wounded sheep. She noticed too. "They don't trust easily," she murmured. "I can tell," he said dryly. When she reached for the handle, her hands trembled. He placed a bill far larger than necessary into her palm. "For food, or a coat?" "Whatever." Her eyes widened, startled. "I can take this." "You can," he said firmly. She hesitated, then closed her fingers around it, but there was no smile this time. Only worry. "They still talk," she said softly. "Let them," he replied. But the talk didn't stay at the shelter. 2 days later, tabloids flashed his face across their covers. "Billionaire seen with mystery woman outside shelter." The headlines twisted the story, painting her as a beggar, a scandal, a secret affair. Rumors spread like fire, investors whispered. Colleagues raised eyebrows. At the boardroom table, his advisors circled. "You can be seen like this," one said. "It undermines credibility," another pressed. "People are questioning your judgment." His jaw tightened. He dismissed them with a glare, but inside, unease brewed. His empire had no patience for vulnerability. Every move was currency, every rumor a weapon. And still, her face haunted him. That night, he found her again, this time outside the shelter, parcel in her lap, shoulders slumped under the weight of whispers. "They kept saying things," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "Let them. Words can bruise me more than life already has." He clenched his fists. "But they can bruise me, my company, my reputation." At that, she raised her eyes to his. Calm. "Then maybe you shouldn't be seen with me." The words hit harder than he expected. "I mean," he began. But she shook her head gently. "You belong to glass towers and bright lights. I belong to shadows. Our worlds don't cross without breaking." He opened his mouth, closed it again. For once, he had no negotiation, no strategy, just silence. She studied him for a moment, then whispered, "You so afraid." His chest tightened. Of what? Of becoming him, she said simply. The words cut through him like a blade. He turned away, unable to meet her gaze. "You don't set know me," he muttered. "I don't set need to," she said softly. "I know the storm in your eyes, it's Sep's the same one that took him away." Rain pattered harder against the awning above them, dripping between the cracks, cold against his neck. He wanted to deny it, to leave, to bury himself again in the only world he understood. But instead he whispered, barely audible, "What if you stare right?" Her hand, frail and trembling, reached out, stopping short of his sleeve. "Then you stop walking, before the door closes." That's how storms end. Their eyes met. For the first time he let her see not the billionaire, not the polished mask, just the boy who had waited too long at the door. And for a breath, he felt both exposed and relieved. But as voices stirred behind them, murmurs from the shelter, suspicious eyes watching again, the fragile moment fractured. He stepped back, walls slamming up once more. "I shouldn't set be here." And before she could answer, he turned and walked into the rain. The rain had stopped, but inside him the storm raged louder than ever. For days he threw himself into work, back-to-back meetings, endless numbers, flights between cities. He told himself he was proving everyone wrong, showing strength, control. Yet, every deal signed, every hand shaken, felt hollow. Worse, the whispers grew louder. The tabloids didn't let go. They painted her as everything from a mistress to a con artist. Shareholders called for reassurance. Partners demanded answers. And through it all, one truth gnawed at him: she hadn't asked for any of it. He found himself at the bus stop again, long after he'd sworn not to return. She was there as always, clutching the parcel, her coat thinner than the night air. When she saw him, her eyes softened, but only for a moment. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. He clenched his jaw. "Neither should you." She tilted her head, studying him. "You stir angry." "I'm under attack," he snapped. "Because of you." The words came out sharper than he intended, but once they were spoken, they could not be pulled back. Her shoulders flinched as though struck. "Because of me," she repeated softly. "Yes," he pressed, voice low and hard.
Whoa!
"Do you have any idea what you step done? My name's Seps, in headlines. My company's steps questioned, all because I let you in." Silence stretched. She lowered her gaze to the parcel in her lap, fingers brushing the twine as though it were the only thing anchoring her. "I never asked you to," she whispered. The quiet cut deeper than shouting. He wanted her to fight back, to defend herself, to give him a reason to stay angry. Instead, her sadness pressed on him like a weight he couldn't bear. "I was just waiting," she said. "I've always been waiting. If it made you stumble, that's not my burden to carry." Her voice cracked then, and the fracture in it startled him more than his own fury. He stepped back, shaking his head. "I can set to do this. I can set to do this. I can set to do this." His chest heaved. The boy inside him screamed for connection, but the man, the CEO, the survivor, shoved it down. "I can set be what you stare looking for," he said finally. "And set not him. I set never be him. And I once set let myself become him, either." She looked up then, her pale blue eyes glistening. "I never asked you to be him. I only asked you not to walk away like he did." The words struck like lightning, searing, blinding, impossible to ignore. And yet, he turned. Because walking away was easier than staying. The next morning, the tabloids printed new headlines: "CEO seen abandoning woman at shelter." The photo was grainy but cruel, capturing her hunched figure in the rain as his car disappeared into the night. His PR team spun it, his advisors buried it, but nothing silenced the image in his own mind. Her alone. Him leaving. The echo of footsteps that weren't just his father's anymore, they were his. Nights stretched long after that. The penthouse windows looked out over a glittering city, but all he saw was her silhouette at the bus stop. He poured drinks, left them half finished. He read contracts, saw only blurred lines. He built walls higher, but they did nothing to muffle her last words. "I only asked you not to walk away like he did." And still, he had walked. One evening, restless, he drove past the shelter again. This time she wasn't there. The bench was empty, rain pooling in its grooves. A strange panic gripped him. He told himself it was nothing. She could be inside, or gone, or anywhere. But the sight of the empty bench made his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. He parked anyway, staring at the shelter door, half expecting her to emerge. Minutes passed. Nobody came. And for the first time in decades, he felt the raw ache of loss, not of a business deal, not of power, but of someone who had quietly stitched herself into his silence. That night, he lay awake, haunted by the thought. Maybe he hadn't walked away from her. Maybe he walked away from himself. The bench remained empty for 3 nights. Each time he passed, each time he slowed the car, there was nothing. No frail silhouette, no parcel balanced on her knees. Just cold metal glistening with rain. By the 4th night, the emptiness gnawed at him too much to ignore. Against reason, against pride, he stopped at the shelter door. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp coats and instant soup. Dozens of eyes flicked to him, suspicion, curiosity, resentment. He was a stranger in polished shoes and a tailored coat, a man who didn't belong. At the counter, a volunteer with tired eyes looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for a woman," he said, voice lower than usual, small, thin, pale eyes. "Carries a parcel tied with string." The volunteer's expression shifted, recognition, then pity. She disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she held something in her hands. "The parcel." "She's not here," the volunteer said softly. "She hasn't been for 2 days. She left this though, said if anyone came asking. Especially someone who looked like him, give it to them." His breath caught. He took the parcel carefully, as though it might crumble in his hands. The tissue was yellowed with age, the twine fraying, but it was intact. "What happened to her?" he asked. The volunteer shook her head. "We don't know. Sometimes people just stop coming. We hope she found someplace warmer." He nodded, throat tight, and left with the parcel pressed against his chest. Back in his penthouse, the city lights stretched endless beyond the glass, but his eyes were on the small, fragile package on the table before him. He sat for a long time, just staring at it. Finally, with hands that shook more than he wanted to admit, he untied the twine. The tissue fell away, revealing a small wooden box, smooth but worn from years of being held. He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, folded, yellowed, edges fragile. The handwriting across the envelope was neat, careful, his father's name. He drew a sharp breath. For a long moment, he couldn't move. Then, carefully, he slid the paper free. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. "My love. If you are reading this, it means you stayed. I want you to know that no matter how hard life becomes, no matter how cold the world grows, I believe in the warmth inside you. I chose you once, and I would choose you again. This gift is only a symbol, but it carries all that I feel. Don't walk away. Not from me, not from us." Beneath the letter was a small embroidered handkerchief, initials stitched in blue thread, hers and his father's. The stitching was slightly uneven, clumsy in places, but tender. He sat back in his chair, the letter trembling in his hands. She had carried this for 30 years, waiting, believing, hoping he would return so she could give him something so simple, so small, yet filled with love. And now it sat in his hands. Not his father's sips, his. He rose abruptly, pacing the room. His chest felt too tight, as though the walls themselves pressed inward. Why had she given this to him? Why trust him with something so sacred? He looked at the letter again. "Don't walk away." The words burned. Because he had walked from her, just as his father had walked from them both. He pressed the letter to his forehead, eyes shut tight. For the first time in decades, tears cut down his face, silent, unrelenting. Not for her alone, not for his father, but for the boy who had stood in the doorway waiting. And for the man who had sworn never to become him, yet found himself repeating the same footsteps. When the storm inside him finally quieted, he folded the letter gently, returning it to the box. He held it in his lap, staring out at the city. Her words returned to him. Wounds don't heal in silence. He knew what he had to do. The next morning he went back to the shelter. The volunteers shook their heads. No one had seen her. The bus stop was empty, the streets unyielding. But he didn't stop searching. He asked at soup kitchens, churches, corners of the city he had never dared enter. He traded the comfort of glass towers for alleyways and back benches. Everywhere, he carried the parcel close to his chest. Because somewhere she was out there. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't looking for profit, or power, or recognition. He was looking for home. He searched for days. The city became a map of shadows, alleys, doorways, shelters, churches. He asked quietly, discreetly, offering money to anyone who might know her, but most only shrugged. A few nodded vaguely. The woman with the parcel, pale eyes, haven't seen her in a while. Each time his chest sank deeper. Until one evening, just as the city's lights flickered awake against the dusk, he found her. She was sitting on the steps of a closed chapel, bundled in her coat, parcel gone, her hands folded in her lap. The stained glass window above her glowed faintly from a street lamp, painting her in fractured colors, blue, red, gold. When she looked up and saw him, there was no surprise in her eyes, only weariness. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, echoing the words she had spoken before. He ignored them, climbing the steps. He sat beside her, suit dampening against the stone. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he pulled the wooden box from inside his coat and set it gently in her lap. "You left this," he said. Her hands trembled as they touched it, as if she'd been reunited with a child. Her lips parted, but no words came. "I opened it," he admitted. "I read the letter." Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't look at him. She only nodded faintly, her eyes locked on the box. "I understand now," he continued. His voice was quiet, raw. "You weren't waiting for him anymore. You were waiting for someone not to walk away." She finally turned, her pale eyes shining with unshed tears. "And yet you did." The words hit harder than any headline, harder than any corporate betrayal. He bowed his head. "I did," he said, his voice cracked. "Because I was afraid. Afraid I was already him, that I stopped destroy anything I touched. So, I ran before I could prove myself right." Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of distant traffic. Then, slowly her hand reached across the small space between them. Frail, trembling yet steady in its intent, she laid it gently on his arm. "You stare not him," she whispered. "You stare here." The simplicity of it broke him. Tears blurred his vision, spilling hot down his cheeks. He hadn't cried since childhood, not since that door slammed shut. And now, with her hand on his sleeve, the dam shattered. "I don't now know how to stay," he confessed. "I don't now know how to belong." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Then you learn. We both do." For a long time they sat together on the chapel steps. He told her, haltingly at first, about the boy he had been. The boy who had waited in silence, who built walls of steel around himself to survive. She listened, nodding gently, never interrupting. Then she spoke of her years, of working 2 jobs, of losing her home, of nights spent shivering on benches but never letting go of the parcel in her hands. Her voice carried no bitterness, only a strange strength. By the time the street lamps flickered brighter, a quiet understanding had bloomed between them, not that their wounds were healed, not that the years were undone, but that they were no longer carrying them alone. "Come with me," he said suddenly. The words surprised him as much as her. She blinked. "Where?" "To my world, to warmth, to a place where you don't have to wait at bus stops anymore." She shook her head gently, her smile sad. "I would instead belong there." "Yes, you would," he insisted. His voice cracked with urgency. "Because I be there, and I don't belong in it either. Not without." He faltered, searching for the word. "Not without family." Her eyes filled, but she shook her head again. "People like me don't walk into glass towers." "Then I walk out of them," he said firmly. She laughed then, a soft, fragile sound but real. It startled him, warmed him. "You leave all that behind." "I to leave everything," he said, "because none of it matters if I become him." The night air was cold, but between them, something warmer pulsed. For the first time in years, he wasn't a CEO, wasn't a boy waiting at a door. he was simply a man, sitting beside a woman who had carried a wound so much like his own. And for the first time, he chose to stay. Snow fell again that night, softer this time, flakes drifting like feathers across the chapel steps. They lingered there together until the cold pressed too sharply against her thin coat. He noticed her shivering, the tremor in her hands, the blue tinge to her lips. "Come," he said, rising, offering his hand. "At least let me take you somewhere warm, tonight." For a moment she hesitated, pride warring with need. Then she placed her frail hand in his, and he helped her to her feet. His penthouse, usually an empty fortress of glass and steel, felt different when she entered. The silence wasn't suffocating. The walls didn't echo with absence. She stood just inside the door, blinking at the wide windows and gleaming surfaces. "This doesn't feel like home," she murmured. "It never has," he admitted quietly. He guided her to the couch, fetched her a blanket. She tucked it around herself carefully, as though afraid to disturb the luxury. He brought her tea, the steam curling between them. For the first time he realized how hungry he had been for the simple act of caring for someone. They didn't speak much that night. She sipped her tea. He sat across from her, letter and box resting on the table between them, like a witness to everything left unsaid. When she finally drifted to sleep beneath the blanket, her breathing steady, he remained awake. He watched her, and for the first time in decades, he felt peace. Not the peace of success, but the peace of presence. In the morning, she stirred to the smell of something faintly sweet. He stood awkwardly in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, clumsy with a pan. "You cook?" she asked, amused. "I try," he admitted, setting down a plate of slightly burnt toast and scrambled eggs. She laughed softly. It was the second time he had heard it, and he realized he wanted to hear it again and again. "Not bad," she said kindly, though her smile gave away the truth. Days stretched into weeks. Slowly, tentatively she began to return, not always staying but never keeping her distance for long. He didn't parade her in public. He shielded her from headlines and whispers. But in his home, she filled the silence. They talked. They healed. Sometimes in words, sometimes only in quiet gestures, sharing food, watching the snow, sitting side by side without needing to fill the air. And as spring began to thaw the city, she brought out the wooden box one last time. "I want you to keep it," she said, pushing it gently toward him. He shook his head. "It's yours." "It was meant for someone who stayed," she said firmly. "And you did." He hesitated, then lifted the handkerchief again. The initials, hers and his father's, still glimmered faintly in blue thread. He stared at it for a long time, then reached for a pen. Carefully, slowly, he added one more letter beside the others. His own initial. When he showed her, her hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled, spilling silently down her cheeks. "It doesn't erase him," he said softly. "But it means I choose not to leave." Her trembling fingers brushed the cloth, lingering over the added stitch. Then she looked up, and for the first time, the sadness in her eyes gave way to something else, something lighter. Hope. One evening, weeks later, he found himself at the grocery store again. The door chimed as he walked in. This time she was beside him, leaning gently on his arm. Shoppers bustled past, carts rattling, lights buzzing overhead. To anyone else they were just two figures moving quietly through aisles. But to him, it was everything. Because he wasn't set walking alone. Because when she placed a bruised apple in the cart and smiled, he knew what it meant. Not every wound meant ruin. Some things could still be sweet. And as they stepped out into the evening air, bags in hand, the world around them busy and indifferent, he felt the weight he had carried his whole life finally ease. She reached for his hand, and he let her hold it. Not a mother, not a stranger. But family chosen, fragile, enduring. The letter remained on his desk, framed beneath glass. The handkerchief rested beside it, initials bound together by uneven thread. Every morning he glanced at it before stepping into the world, a reminder carved into cloth. Dawn, set, walk away. And each night, when he returned home to find her there waiting, not alone anymore, he knew he never would.